Hi, welcome back to Reaching Out Podcast, a CYC podcast with Mary Lisa, Emily, and Alyssa. And we're here with a special guest that Alyssa's going to introduce for us.
Hi. So today we have my old dance teacher, Miss Lisa. So if you hear me call her Miss Lisa, it's because I'm in the habit and it's hard not to call her that. Who is, well, I'll let her explain herself a little bit, but she's going to be talking today about mental health and more specifically about eating disorder and recovery. So if you want to explain a little bit about yourself, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on. Alyssa, I think it's so funny that you still call me Miss Lisa because you are into your 20s now. And
Yes, I'll
right?
be 21.
Yeah. And you didn't even have to be calling me Miss Lisa when you were like 16, but you still did. Which I think is funny. But anyways, yeah, I'll share a little bit about who I am, I guess, and then if I can get into my story, if that's helpful.
That'd be great.
Perfect.
So right now, I own a business called the Flourishing Space, which is I offer one-on-one coaching as well as workshops, and I do guest speaking and stuff like that. I work with all ages. Mainly, I work with a lot of youths and teens, and I do life coaching, mental health coaching, eating disorder recovery. And I guess my story has kind of brought me to where I am. So I'll start from the beginning. I guess basically there were a lot of warning signs and just behaviors throughout my life that I guess weren't normal for a child or a teen. A lot of negativity on myself, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of people pleasing and feeling like I had to be someone I wasn't. That went on for a while. And then when I actually hit probably age 20 or 21, I moved out on my own. And I think for the first time, this is when I really started to find a sense of control in my life. I'm from a big family, and I feel like, again, I was kind of always, not that I had a great childhood. I'm very fortunate for that. However, I feel like I was always, kind of worried about stepping on others' toes. I felt like maybe I had a little bit of no control. So when I finally started to gain control, it came out in unhealthy habits. I started controlling more about, what I looked like, what I ate, and it sent me down a pretty bad hole, and it sent me into a little bit of a spiral. And I developed a very toxic eating disorder, a couple of eating disorders. I mean, there's many, many types of it. But again, in school growing up, you only really learn about one type of eating disorder. And from what I learned, I didn't fit the criteria. So I didn't even know that I had an eating disorder, which I will get into later on. Very passionate about that subject because that's a whole other issue in itself. But yeah, so I was struggling for quite a bit. Family was concerned, people were concerned. And then maybe about 8 months in, I went to my doctor, and she diagnosed me with what was going on. And I'm like, oh, okay, those are big words. Didn't really know this, because those voices and the illness kind of just take over your brain completely. And I didn't even know who I was anymore. And she actually referred me to the recovery program at my doctor's office. And then I never heard back from them. So I didn't hear back for about 4 months, and it was very confusing. But I mean, the thing about this illness is that was almost like a good thing to me, because the illness doesn't want you to get better. It wants to take over your brain. It wants to be the strongest voice in your brain. So, and the loudest one. So that was almost like a win to me, and that felt good. But when I had to go back, I kind of asked about the recovery program, and I was like, hey, I didn't really hear anything. And she's like, oh, let me check. And she checks and she goes, oh, you were rejected from it. And I was like, what? I was rejected from the recovery program? And she was like, yeah, your heart rate is too low. And so I'm like, what? So I'm rejected from the recovery program, excuse me, that's supposed to make me healthier because I'm too sick. And she
So
was like, yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt for a second because I really want to draw attention to this. So you you waited 4 months and had to call yourself, even though
Yep.
part of your brain was saying, don't call. And they know this, that part of their brain is going to be saying, don't stop me.
Yep.
They didn't
Yep.
even let you know that you were too sick and you were too sick for help.
It's just mind blowing to me. And it's something I don't understand the logic of, and why I really, really have a hard time with a lot of medical professionals. And I'm not saying everyone is like this, but I don't think mental health was explored enough. And I don't think that they were doing something extremely dangerous. I mean, those 4 months, we don't know what could have happened. And it's, so she pretty much told me I was too sick for the eating disorder recovery program. So again, this to me was a win. And so I left being like, oh, okay. And it wasn't until another couple months that I took matters into my own hands and I found my own recovery coach, which is now what I do. And I still work with my recovery coach. She's a big part of my life. And that's kind of what inspired me, because that's what changed my life.
So they sent you away, but didn't send you somewhere else.
No.
They didn't refer you somewhere.
Nope. I did that on my
Wow.
own. Yeah.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
mind-blowing.
How resourceful and resilient you are that you did that on your own, that you fought that part of your brain that said, don't do this. Wow.
In order to reach out and get help, I think is the scariest yet strongest thing that one person can do. And that's that was the life-changing thing, just going on Google and searching what I can do for myself, because it was really unfortunate. And I even remember I had to call, or they called me with check up on my blood work and everything. And it was clear that I was low on a lot of things. And the woman starts naming off a list of foods that I shouldn't eat. And I'm thinking, why the hell are you telling somebody who is struggling really bad foods that she shouldn't eat? So the education on that is just way off. But again, it led me to my recovery coach. So I can't help but look back and be thankful for that. I'm so glad that happened, because I do think that if I was in that recovery program, this wouldn't be my life now. And I think what my coach did and what I am able to do for others now is guide them to not just a quick fix to health, but a whole lifestyle change, a whole mindset change, a full free life. And I think I can only be thankful for everything that happened, right?
What a great attitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody, like, I'm a mom, I have 18-year-old twin girls. So what would you say to somebody like me who, if my daughter started to show signs, thankfully neither of them do right now, but if they did, I would want to say, well, just eat. But yet I know that's not that simple, but I imagine that people who don't even know it, like, I would want to say it even knowing that it's not that simple. How do you address that to people who look at you and say, would just eat?
I think that's one of the hardest things to overcome as both a supporter and the person struggling. Because it's frustrating from the outside perspective, simply because you don't know what's going on in their brain. But the more that instead of kind of, how do I word this? I think the more as a society, we have to understand that it is a complete mental mind game. And it's actually not really about the food itself. It's all a mind game. It's all what's going on in the mindset. So as frustrating as it is for somebody on the outside being like, I just don't get it, we have to kind of, be sympathetic and understand that the person struggling probably doesn't get it either. Like, they don't understand why they can't eat something and feel normal about it. Or if they do eat and they have a fully healthy diet, why they still feel weird feelings. Because that's another thing. There are eating disorders where people are fully eating normally, but they are actually struggling And it's because it's all the mindset, and it's the mental health, it's the mental side of it. So if you do come across and see somebody struggling, the more you can encourage them to, obviously find additional support, whether it be with a professional or find their support system, and kind of challenging those voices, recognizing what's happening and changing the narrative in your head to a positive one, finding their strengths and, working with those, that's really helpful.
Finding their strength and working with those. That sounds like our entire program right there.
Is it?
That is a very big mantra in our program. Strength-based, yes.
Oh, I love it.
So, yeah, we appreciate you saying like that. Just brought it to full circle to what we were talking about, to what we're here for. So,
oh, that's awesome.
I just want to go back just for a second. Do you mind just telling us the year that you were like basically ignored by your doctor? Because I think people also assume that this is also stuff that's happening like way back when people didn't understand it as much, but I'm assuming it was still pretty recent.
Yeah, that was, I guess it would have been 2016 or 2017. So no, that wasn't before mental health was talked about.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Still mind-blowing that you can be too sick for help.
That's right. That's the logic really doesn't sit well with me.
Well, I read a few statistics before we came on here, and one of the statistics I read is that it is of all mental illness, it's the most likely to be deadly, and 10% of people diagnosed with it, with anorexia, actually die.
Yep.
And the fact that they said you're too sick and then didn't offer any medical help, like that is just alarming.
It is. And it's terrifying.
Yeah, like I guess I can understand maybe that program not being the right fit for you, but then you offer other supports or you refer them somewhere else where they can get the
Emily, I
help that
think
they
you
need.
dropped
You
off
don't
there
just
for a
ignore the
second.
problem.
Exactly.
I think you dropped off for
where
half
the
a
logic
second. Do you
is.
want to
If
repeat
you're
that,
so
Emily?
concerned, maybe not even concerned, but if you tell me I'm too sick, then what's my next step? Where do I go? Because I'm obviously lost here. And if I'm not even worthy of being in the doctor's office to get better, then what are you saying? Because, it's hard to navigate. You don't even know what's happening to yourself. And then you're wondering why my brain is telling me being sick is a good thing. So it's definitely a mind game. And that was not easy to grasp, but that's kind of why I share my story now. And that's why I do what I do. Because of reasons like those.
I read that perfectionism is a big part of it, and you talked more about control.
Mm-hmm.
Like perfectionism sometimes is a form of control. So is it about having, like, if you give someone more control over their life, is that going to help in a situation like this, or?
I think it can hit in many different ways. I mean, like with eating disorders, there's also, I've suffered with anxiety, depression, and it's part of the package is what I always say. But perfectionism definitely comes with, it's when you have this voice, depending on what you are struggling with. Of course, I'm only speaking on my own experience. It gave me this sense of control of what I was eating, control of what I was doing. And that kind of came out in other ways as well. For example, you talk about perfectionism. I don't know if this is really answering your question, but I was so caught up with control and this need for routine that if something was thrown off, if my bed was not made properly, I would lose it. I would cry, I would scream, and it started to affect more than just what I was controlling, eating wise and working out wise. It became my life. And yeah, it can really take over in that sense. So throughout recovery, kind of finding that carefree attitude that I once had, and being okay with breaking routine and just kind of accepting things as they come is a big part of it, and a big part of freedom, because it's not, I didn't want to be screaming that my pillow was a centimeter off, but it's just that voices need for control over literally every part of your life that can become dangerous. So, I mean, for some people, maybe having more control works, but for me, it became really, really dangerous.
I understand.
I was just wondering, did you find any more like stigma around your eating disorder because you had it more towards being an adult other than being a teenager? Because I feel like society assumes that eating disorders are more of like a, an adolescent, like youth issue more than an adult issue, even though that's untrue.
Mm-hmm, big time. That's actually a really good question. And I don't think that's talked about enough. In school, I know in school, in health class, I talk about this quite often. We grow up learning that eating disorders are one thing. It's anorexia or it's binge eating. And in order to be anorexic, you have to look a certain way. And if you don't, then you're probably not sick enough. And we learn all these stereotypes around it. But the reality of it is eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes. They happen to anyone. I know women in their 70s who are still struggling. And I know kids who are struggling. And the truth is mental illness can hit whenever, whatever age. And that's, it definitely, it's not talked about enough. And I think that was another thing too. I think for me, because I'm a very strong-willed person, I was very hesitant to get help because I was like, well, I'm strong enough. I don't need people to care about me anymore. I'm an adult. I think about like my mom who would lose sleep over me, but then I would be like, why? I'm old enough. Like, you don't have to care about me. And I think it was like this feeling of nobody should have to care about me in that sense anymore because I'm old enough. But in reality, the people who love you and the people who support you will still care about you. But yeah, it was definitely in my mind, like, I'm too old for this. I don't look like that. I'm not sick enough. I shouldn't be, this is, I guess in the beginning, I kind of thought I was just being dramatic without realizing that it was actually a mental illness. Yeah.
Well, do
I
you
suffer.
find...
Sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Mary Lisa.
Well, I suffer from anxiety, and I feel that way lots of times. I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
That feeling of, oh, that's just me. I'm just being dramatic. Just let me be
Yeah.
overblown about it. I really relate to that. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to say, as like a professional in the field, do you find that there's enough supports for adults? Because I was looking into supports before we talking with you, and I found that there was a real lack for adults. Do you find that as well?
Oh yeah, completely. And I mean, I think that a lot of professionals and a lot of people who they do offer support for adults, but we hear about, and I'm not taking this away from children whatsoever, but we hear about the increase in eating disorders in adolescents, but we don't hear about the increase in eating disorders in adults. So it's just, you're right, it's just not talked about enough.
Do you think that signs of it started when you were younger, or do you think it totally started when you were an adult?
Looking back now, I never had a good relationship with my body, or I mean, I was fine with food. I grew up as a dancer, and dancing was my confidence. Like, it gave me all the confidence in the world. But looking back, like, I think about when I was 10 years old and my body wasn't the tiny little kid anymore. I was starting to go through, puberty and changes. I was bullied in the 6th grade for I was called fat and flat because apparently my boobs were not big enough for a 10-year-old, but whatever.
A 10-year-old. Oh, man.
Yeah, I know. Apparently that's a thing. Well, you know what? To that bully, like, my boobs still aren't big, so get over it. But I think back to those times where I would put on a bathing suit. I'd put on a bikini and like do workouts in the mirror, staring at myself at age 10. And that's not normal for a kid to do. I remember my friends growing up. One of my who she was like my best friend, but she wasn't a very positive person in my life. Um, she would introduce me to cellulite and like our muffin tops, and she'd be like, "Oh, we both have them," and we'd kind of tear ourselves apart. And I'm like, hey, that's also not normal behavior for a 9-year-old to do. So I think there were, I don't know if I would call these warning signs. I just don't think I ever had a very healthy relationship with my body until maybe I was a teenager. I felt okay, but I was also kind of in the generation where mental health was not really talked about and diet culture was still a thing. You saw it on every magazine. These were the years where like Atkins and famous diet pills and stuff were glorified. So it was kind of always surrounding me. But again, I don't know if these were like warning signs that something worse was going to come. But yeah.
Did the dance culture or dance community, do you think that you said it gave you confidence, so did that help or hurt?
That's a question I get a lot. And I think people automatically like assume that, they make the assumption that it was dance. But I have to be honest, like when I was competing and growing up, dance gave me the most confidence I've ever had in my life. That's like, I think of my years as a teenager and in high school, and when I was training sometimes 7 days a week, that's when I felt my best. And I wasn't ripping myself apart. I wasn't being ripped apart. I just was very fortunate because I know that some dancers do struggle. And I know that there are teachers out there who make it known that your body has to look a certain way. So maybe I was just very fortunate in that aspect that I grew up in a really safe environment and a safe studio. But yeah, surprisingly, like dance was my saving grace for my teenage years.
I have to agree with Lisa. When I was a teenager, my dance team was at least 5 years younger than I was.
Yeah.
But I was the most confident I ever was until I graduated and I stopped.
Yeah. Exactly. And I was the same too, Liz, because when I was a senior, just like you, everybody was younger than me. They were like 5 years younger than me too. And I was always like the tallest, and I did not look like, some of them were like just hitting puberty.
Yeah.
So some of them haven't even hit puberty. So but that never affected me or affected how I looked. I think I was just thankful to be a really strong leader in their lives. And that's what mattered more to me.
I think I feel the same way because I knew how much younger my team was. I made sure not to say I didn't like this about myself or I didn't like that about myself. And Miss Lisa, when I was dancing, was always the biggest supporter of love yourself for who you are. We always had to say all of these, I can't even think of the word right now, but she used to make us all say that we are strong, we are beautiful, we are smart, we are brave, all of these amazing things. And I think that helped. And I hope it helped the kids that are still dancing because they're much younger to kind of grow up and feel comfortable.
Yeah. Your affirmations. Is that the word you're looking for? Yeah.
Yes.
Love my affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody who thinks they may have an eating disorder is scared to reach out and get help. Part of their brain is saying, don't stop this, don't reach out and get help. What would a first session with somebody like you, a coach, look like for them so that they can feel a little more comfortable reaching out and getting help?
The way that I describe my coaching technique is I want you to look at me as if I am your big sister and we are having a conversation. So I don't really dive right deep into what are you eating? What is happening here? Rate this on a scale, like none of that shit. I very much keep it real. I ask about them. I want to know about them. I want to know what they love. I want to know what they love to do. I want to know what makes them happy. I want to know their strengths. I want to know their weaknesses. And from there, we just kind of open up the conversation and we break down barriers as to why these behaviors and why these voices are happening. And then from there, we'll start to challenge those voices a little more and set goals and put them into action. So I always say, like, yeah, I'm your coach, but this is a conversation, and it's a safe space. If you want to show up in your pajamas with a margarita or a hot chocolate, fine, I'll do the same, and we will just chat. And that's the importance of it, because the more that we can just work from the inside out and allow them to reflect on who they actually are and understand that they are not their illness, and they are much louder than this voice, even though it might not feel like it, that's when the health and the freedom and the happiness start to happen.
Just to get a better understanding of this, is this like a week by week you're meeting with them, an appointment only? Are they able to call you like when they need you?
So I do, at least to start off, I do like 1 hour sessions every week. And then, depending on where they are in their journey, sometimes I'll do like 1 hour and then half an hour check in the next week, and then 1 hour again, so on and so forth. But I always tell them I'm always here. I love when they text me their wins for the day or a goal they accomplished, or if they're having a rough day and they need some additional positive energy, then, I'm always available to them in that sense. So I tell them, like, yeah, we have a 1 hour meeting every week, but that doesn't mean that's all I'm here for. I am a guide and a mentor. And not only that, but I'm a part of their journey and I'm a part of their support system. So I very much open up myself and my space and that for them as well.
What do you think the biggest mistake people make when supporting somebody or wanting to support somebody, but turning out maybe not to be supportive with an eating disorder, whether they're a parent or a caregiver or a mental health professional? What do you think the biggest mistake is out there?
That's a good question. I think knowing what I know now, I honestly I always say we have to, as somebody who is struggling, you kind of have to learn to what's the word? Give people who don't understand a little bit of a leeway. Like, as if they're trying to actively understand, they might say the wrong things. They might say things that are helpful. They might say things that are helpful one week, but trigger you the wrong way the next. It's very hard to navigate, and it's very hard to learn and understand this. So I don't really know what might be the biggest mistake. I think all I can say is the best thing you can do is, if you are a part of that support system, to just keep learning and just be patient and just listen and encouraging, obviously not forcing them to do anything that they are extremely uncomfortable with. We don't want to be physically forcing or anything like that. But I would just say keep learning and keep listening and keep educating yourself and just be patient. For example, I was actually just talking about this the other day. My boyfriend Ryan is obviously he's my life partner. He's a very big part of my support system. And he went to meetings with me and he learned with me. And one week, if I was feeling really good and confident, he would say something or I would say something and he'd be like, oh my God, that's awesome. But if he said it the next week, but I was in another weird headspace, it would trigger me. So if he said that, I'd be like, well, why would you say that? And he was like, you said that last week. And it's confusing. And it breaks my heart to think that, but he was so patient and it just challenged us both. So just keep learning and just keep educating. That's my biggest advice on that.
You mentioned something before about how social media kind of glorifies, or can you talk about how social media and eating disorders are, or how you perceive them to be, if that makes sense?
Do you mean like how I see on social media, like the bad side of it?
Yeah. So you were saying how people were glorifying
Oh yeah. Yeah.
eating disorders.
I think in that aspect, I see a lot on things like TikTok and stuff like that. Just And maybe it's just more in the sense that like people are sharing their workout routines or their health routines or their diets or whatever and assuming it's healthy and telling other people what to do, but really they're uneducated and it's not healthy. People are commenting being like, oh my gosh, you're so skinny, like stuff like that that just really isn't helpful. And I think this just comes from a lack of education on the topic and not realizing like what they actually are. I've seen people who are open about their eating disorders and kind of teaching behaviors and giving tips and stuff like that, which is a whole other side. And thankfully, I don't really come across that as much, maybe just because I actively don't try to come across that. But it's out there and it's scary because on things like TikTok, where you're just constantly scrolling and you don't know what's going to pop up next, it can be very scary for the young minds that aren't even fully developed and are very vulnerable as to what they're seeing and what they're reading. So yeah.
Do you feel that there's a way that social media could be used in a beneficial way?
I think the more that people can just be real and honest and share their story and also share the downfalls of it, but share the wins and, support each other and spread awareness. And I think the big reason why I try to be active on social media in this sense is that I want to educate people properly on what an eating disorder is. And I think that's the number one thing right now that we need more of in social media, not just sharing our stories, but actually educating people on what it looks like. Because again, if we go back to that health class, like, I don't know about you guys, but my health class in I don't know, the 5th grade did not prepare me for what mental illnesses actually are. And I've even, talked with some school-aged kids now, and they tell me about what they learned about eating disorders in health class and stuff. And I'm hearing things like, oh yeah, we have to track what we eat and we're not allowed to eat something bad. And if we do, we get a lower grade. And I'm just like, what? Like that's very twisted. And that's just a recipe to develop bad behaviors as they get older. So I think the more that we can use social media as a platform to educate properly, I think that's really going to have an impact on these young brains, especially.
I find sorry, Marianne.
Go ahead, Emily. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I find with even the other people we've spoken to, like curriculum in school just really needs to be updated and brought to like more awareness on so many topics, because a lot of the stuff that they teach is either extremely dated or that it's just they're uneducating people in general. And from what you're talking about, and I've done that assignment in health class where you write down what you eat, and if you eat something bad, you get points taken off, and and that's so detrimental.
Exactly.
I was just going to tell a little bit of a funny story about that one time I picked my kids up from school and decided it was a day I wasn't cooking. We were going to McDonald's, and we went to McDonald's right from school. And as we're sitting in McDonald's, I say to my kids, what do you have for homework tonight? Oh, we have to write down everything we eat. And as a mom, you're thinking, okay, this only reflects on me, not on the child. This isn't teaching him anything.
And right away they're failing.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, we all just failed this. Do I teach my children how to lie now, or just let them take the hit on the mark?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's wild. And I mean, there's still like, even now they have to follow like that old school Canadian food guide and stuff like that. It's just so silly. And I've been fortunate to be able to speak with some schools, but I've also had schools that just have no interest in trying to educate their students and their health classes. And I mean, especially around that age when they're starting to hit puberty and they're getting older and they're allowed social media and stuff like that. I'm like, this is when we need to start. This is when we need to start educating properly, because, it's a scary world out there.
So do you think health classes should invite someone like you in to speak?
Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that, but I just think that they need to like you said, they need to update their curriculum. And I never put it on the teachers because I get it. Like you get the lesson plans, you have to teach it, whatever. But it's just as a whole, like we're in 2021 now. Like, come on, mental illness is more talked about. We are breaking the stigma, but why aren't you catching up to it yet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In grade 12, I took food and nutrition, and I had a full argument with my teacher because she told me I ate too much. I looked at her and I said, I dance 4 days a week. I teach gymnastics too. So that's 6 days. And she goes, well, you're snacking too much. And I was like, well, I was at dance for maybe 4 hours that night. And I was like, of course I'm going to snack. I'm hungry. I'm burning all of these calories. I need more energy. And it was a full argument that I was eating too much, even though I don't think I was.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. And good for you for standing up to that, because exactly, like that's another thing. These teenagers, why are they being told to track what they eat and that bad food is, off limits and everything like that? These are growing kids. Like they're active, they're at school all day, they're busy. Maybe they go to jobs after work, maybe they go to dance or soccer, whatever it is. These kids are growing. And
going through puberty
exactly
increases your appetite. It does.
Yep.
And we had to track the calories. We had to Google what the calories were for what we were eating and put them down. And I was like, that's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. Like,
I didn't
what?
do it because I was against it at the time. And now looking back, I'm glad I stood up for myself and said, I'm not writing the calories down because I don't want to know.
I'm glad you did that too.
And it's sad in a sense now because it's so much easier for people to do that because they have all of these apps now that can do it for you, and you can like scan the barcodes of your food and they can add it in for you. Like it's just becoming honestly ridiculous at this point.
It is. And I have people kind of going off that. I have not a lot of people, but I've had people talk to me about, well, what if I do want to lose weight? Like, what if I'm not happy with my body and I want to lose weight? And I'm like, listen, it all comes from the mindset. It all comes from working on your mental health, because that's when you notice changes. That's when things start happening. The more that you can change the narrative in your head, the more that you can do it for the right reasons and find that confidence in yourself and find that overall health and happiness and zest for life again, that's when it starts happening. People just want a quick fix with everything. And it's not, and it's so much more glorified to do a quick fix. And that's how these, that's how bad behaviors begin. So if we can just encourage a better and a healthier lifestyle, that's,
mentally
that's
and physically.
Yeah. Mentally and physically. Exactly.
I really relate to that. I'm actually, since this is a podcast, you can't see, I'm overweight. Okay. And I know when my own mental health is not as good, that's when I'm eating more and moving less.
Yeah.
And when my own mental health is better, I'm like, oh, like sun's starting to shine again. I'm perking up a bit more again. So I'm going out for walks now more again and walking the dog more. And so it really isn't about the food or the number on the scale.
Yep, exactly.
And I just feel as there's like so many aspects that need to be worked on before we can even fix that, because it's also, I am someone who also is a bit bigger. So it's like, I can remember when I was in high school and I'd go into the stores that everyone would shop at, and all of the mannequins and all of the models would be like so thin, or the sizes wouldn't even fit me. And I remember feeling like that. I was like, oh, well, I need to stop eating, or I need to eat less. And it's like, actually, no, maybe these places should just be more inclusive to all different bodies.
Totally. And that's a whole other, I think a lot of stores are finally getting it, but there are places like Brandy Melville, one size fits all. Well, what if that one size doesn't fit me? What does that mean?
Yeah, and it's like one size fits all, but it's like a size 4 and under.
Yeah.
It's like, when did that become one size?
And that's another thing that really messes with your brain, because like I remember being at my sickest point and being like, well, my pant size is not the size as somebody who is anorexic. And that just sends you down even worse. Like, that's not improving anything, right? Because we're grown to believe that the number on the scale and the size of your pants matter, when in reality, it doesn't matter at all. It does not dictate anything about you.
Exactly. Do you, like, if there's one thing that society could understand about eating disorders and like the stigma around it, what would you want it to be?
Ooh, my gosh, there's so many, but I think my top ones are, number one, anybody of any age, any gender, any size can struggle with an eating disorder. There's this weird thing that you have to look a certain way, or that only females struggle, which is just not true. So I would definitely say that any size, literally any person in the world can struggle. And that there are also many different types of eating disorders. It's not just like the two that we learn about in school. And I think this is finally getting out there. But this is something growing up that I didn't know, that eating disorders are a mental illness, and we don't choose them. We choose how we handle them, but we don't choose them. I did not wake up and say, I would love an eating disorder for breakfast today. Like, that's not how it goes. But growing up, I remember seeing other people close to me struggle and just kind of being like, why are they doing that? And not really understanding that it is a mental illness. Like, they are struggling hard. This is not them wanting to be skinny. It is a daily battle. And I do think that's getting a little more known now, at least with what I've been seeing. But again, growing up, I never even knew that. So yeah.
Do you think help is accessible to everybody, financially or just in rural areas? How can we get help to be more accessible to everyone?
I think that's a good question. I mean, I know that there are programs within schools and within doctors' offices and hospitals. I think the more that here's where I'm kind of, and if I'm looking at kids right now, so more adolescents, and I'll get into adults, of course, but for adolescents, I think the more that we can offer things within the schools, almost like whether it be guidance counselors and we're kind of educating them a bit more, or even bringing in a coach like myself, to be there, to support them as well, or coming into health class and educating them, or opening up a time to talk, stuff like that. I think that would be really helpful, because I don't think there's enough of that, because in school it's all about, where you're going to college. But then for adults, I think you raise a good point as to, I don't think there are enough, besides, like, maybe I'm just not aware of them, but enough like free support. There are groups, there are Facebook groups and stuff like that I do encourage, but even just, I don't know if there's there are clinics where they have someone in that you can talk to, stuff like that. I'm actually not too aware of that.
And you're not a medical professional, so what do you do when your clients need medical help because their mental illness has caused medical issues?
If they need medical help, then I just kind of speak one-on-one with them about encouraging them to go talk to their doctor, and they kind of take it from there. So I am very much, doctors, yes, of course, get the physical health where it needs to be. I am the whole mindset of it all. So I work to change that lifestyle. That's really what I aim to do.
Would you, because it becomes medical, then if you had a youth, breach confidentiality and talk to their parents?
Yes, for sure.
If you had to, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're aware of that going in, that's...
Oh yeah,
that your confidentiality
that's a big part.
Only lasts to their...
Yeah. And even with parents, sometimes they'll join for like half the meeting and then leave us for half the meeting. Sometimes they'll stay for the whole...
We're back.
Should I pause the recording?
I might have, but I'm not sure I remember right now. My brain's a little slow this morning.
Mary Lisa, did you ask a question
I think
right
I
before it
said
cut
something to the
off?
fact that they're aware of the fact that you would have to breach confidentiality in those circumstances, in a health circumstance.
That's okay.
Oh, yes. And I think I started to answer, but then I got cut off. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Basically, depending on their age, if they feel more comfortable having their parents with them during the meeting or not, I kind of let them decide that on their own. And yeah, if it, I like to update the parents if they ask for it. They are obviously their guardians. So yeah, if it gets to that point, then I won't hesitate to involve the parents more.
Is it the parents seeking you out most of the time, or is it the youth that you're working with?
What I've noticed is that, yeah, it is the parents, but the youth is always on board. Like there's never, I haven't really experienced a time where they didn't want to, speak with me type thing. They're always, up for it. So I have yet to cross that bridge. But I also have had maybe a little bit older, not as much youth, because I do work with teens and
So you
adults
don't
as
have many
well.
clients
I
who say,
have had
I don't even have
the
a
teens
problem.
like
My
reach
parents
out
just
to
think
me
I
and
do.
take it upon themselves, which is great. So yeah. No, I haven't. I think I think I've been very, very fortunate and they've been very fortunate that they are always up to work with me. And maybe that's just my approach because I don't approach them as if, they're just like a patient that
Human being to
needs
human
help.
being.
I approach them as though they're somebody I can have a conversation with.
I read an alarming stat that
Exactly.
I just thought was so surprising. There's so much conversation about type 2 diabetes and things like that right now. And I read that in Canada, a child is estimated to be 2 to 4 times greater to have an eating disorder than
Mm-hmm.
type 2 diabetes. Yet we hear so much more about type 2 diabetes.
Wow. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's because they engrave it in us to fear food.
And I
And
just feel like there's always a stigma around like all mental health disorders because I feel like society thinks if we talk about them, we're going to like quote unquote create them. Like we're going to create problems. I've heard a lot of people, like a lot of older people in my life, have said that to me when I talk about things. They're like, "Oh, don't say that." Like it's just gonna like come out of thin air, and like people are gonna make these things up. It's like no, they're always there. It's just like you're just making people feel more supported and more heard, and like they can get help.
exactly. And you know what? I think when I started to open up about my struggles, that was one of my biggest fears was like, well, I don't want people to think that like, what if somebody says they want to look like me, but they don't really know what I've been through? What if I say the wrong thing and somebody's like, "Oh, I want to try that." There's always that fear. Um, but in reality, you don't know who you could be helping. That this any mental illness makes you feel alone. And when you hear that other people have gone through or are going through the same thing as you, it does bring you a sense of comfort and encouragement. So, although, yeah, like you said, it can be really scary to share certain parts of your story, we have to remember that
A therapist once said
it
to
is
me
going to reach
that the
somebody
dark
and
can
it
be very
could change
scary. The
somebody's life.
shadows and
So,
things lurking
we
around
can't
seem
stop
very
doing it.
scary. But when you shine a light on them, they become much more manageable, much less scary.
Exactly. And it's true. It's like I always say, whenever you're dealing with something, no matter what it is, you have two ways to approach it. You can let it take over your life, or you can take control of it. You can turn your trauma into your purpose, or you can let it take over your life. And the more that we can share our stories and encourage others to turn their trauma into their purpose as well, and remind others that you are not your illness, and it's just a voice that you are now quieting in the back of your mind.
That's really nice. Like I feel that. I really hear that, and I think that that's a very important message to get out there. To just talk about it. Talk about it. Whatever it is, whether it's an eating disorder, whether it's when we talked about the LGBTQ group of youth we talked to, it's very similar things are coming through. Changing the curriculum in schools, talking about it, being open, and having more support. Yeah, because with the transgender, having the supports there was huge.
Yep.
So,
and more supports.
Yep.
And we especially found in this sense for adults, there was such a lack. Like when I was doing my research, I could find a good amount for teens and youths, but like I found one for adults in the GTA.
Yeah.
That wasn't like private.
Yeah.
And not everyone's able to afford private, so they definitely need more out there for sure.
Definitely. And that's another thing that, like, along with coaching, because I understand having that one-on-one coaching is a luxury. And that's why I also, I do what I can I'll always message people back whenever they message me. I'll post what I can. I have a podcast as well, where I share information and just open up my story and kind of just share tips on, a healthier lifestyle and stuff like that.
With your permission, on our description of this, we'd like to share links to all of that.
So people do have additional resources.
Go for it.
Oh, of course. That'd be awesome.
I don't know if you want to shout any of it out now before we end off.
Okay, sure. Gladly. Let me just plug myself. So my Instagram is at the Flourishing Space. And you can find that on Facebook as well. I also have a private Facebook group that's the Flourishing Space Mental Health Group, where in there we just kind of post positive things, wins of the week, just like encouragement, challenges, stuff like that. And my podcast is called Fruit and Flourishing. So I post episodes every Thursday. And then on Mondays, I post it's called the Monday Motive, which is just kind of just a good way to start your week. Just like quick, helpful tips for productivity and stuff like that. So yeah, that's me. And my website, awesome. Of course, my website is theflourishingspace.ca. And that's where all my info and everything like that is.
Thank you so much. You were such an awesome guest.
Oh, thank you guys for having me.
I really didn't know much before about.
Well, I'm glad I could come on here and spread a little more information, and I'm glad you guys even thought of me. So thank you so much.
Like one of,
no, it's all thanks to Alyssa.
But still,
my girl,
one
Liz.
of my biggest role models, because you are very positive and very strong. So thank you for coming. Yeah.
Oh,
you're so open, which is so lovely.
And that's something that definitely came with growth, which is funny because I was a closed book all my life, but now it's like you can't stop me. So,
and thanks to our listeners for listening today.
Thank you guys again.
Hopefully they learned a lot at reaching out.
Okay.
Of course.